Now we have arrived to the place where we're going to look at the first hexagram through the lines and also in the wheel. So here we have the first hexagram in Scorpio, deep emotional waters of transformation. We have it between the 44 and the 43. And in the first line, we have a very solitary process, because this first gene key, this first gate, is about the inner fire, but it's also about the lack of inner fire and those periods or moments of rest where nothing is sparking. And the first line is here to investigate the fire and also the rest, that process of winter and summer, of entropy and freshness. And in the first line, we have in the investigation, we have solitude. So there, it can be a very solitary process for a long time. And the important thing here is to not repress, to actually come to the moment where we want to share that spark with the world. We want to come out from our basement, from our cocoon. And even if it feels a little bit insecure, to share, we are here to share. We're here to be empowered through that sharing about our process, our creation, the spark that comes through us. In the second line, we have an archetype that wants to do the creativity with the other. It wants to be in dance with the other. It wants to be fulfilled with the other. It wants to be sharing that inner fire with the other. And it has a tendency to think that when there is no fire or creativity, it's the other person's fault. So here it's about learning to not blame, to learning to use the other as a mirror to learn more about yourself. Okay, there is something in the relationship now that feels like there is no energy. Instead of blaming the other, what is it in me? What is it with my inner fire that wants to happen? What is it that I'm gestating right now? What is it that I need to allow and tune into? Those are really good questions for the second line, instead of lashing out and thinking it's the other person's fault. And in the third line, is going to be a dynamic and a fiery process. And here I feel like maybe in the shadow frequency, it's going to go in more into the reactive pattern of being frenetic activity, or trying in one way or another, at least, to escape the low frequency, because it's going to be scary to feel that entropy, that depression. And the third line wants to be movement. It wants to be dynamic. So it's not going to want to feel that. So important for the third line to allow both the sadness and the joy. It's here to be able to go through life with humor. And that means to even be there when it feels like everything is a tragedy. To be resilient in that sense, to be robust, even when you fall, even in the lower frequencies. And in a relationship, I would say it's to stay and commit even to the moments where there isn't any inner fire, even to the moments that aren't dynamic. Can you still stay and live through them and see that this is part of being human? Because that's what we want the third line to tune into, its own humanity, instead of running away to the next fire, to the next spark. And then in the fourth line, in the line companion, it actually says for this specific line, it's aloneness that sparks creativity, or aloneness as medium of creativity. So even if it's a fourth line that needs to connect with other people from the heart and have trust and be sharing, there is a moment possibly between winter and spring where it needs to be alone with that fertile soil, with that process of rest, that gestation of something inside the body. So important for the fourth line to not just be with community and kinship all the time and think that that's the only way for the inner fire to have value. There is actually a going back to the first line and allowing those process of solitude, because that's where the soil is really going to be fertile. And then the fifth line, I think here the process of depression can be deep. The mind is going to come in the 5th and the 6th line. If the 3rd and the 4th line was more about the emotional state, and the 1st and the 2nd are actually even more physical in the way that they play out. Well, the 5th and the 6th is more mental. So here I feel like it's often with our mind that we judge depression. And if the mind wouldn't judge it, it would be easier for the body to just receive and rest in the moments of entropy, of feeling the void. But the mind often comes in and says, no, this is not the right way to feel. This is not the inner fire I want to be feeling. This is not the creativity I want to put out in the world. So for the 5th line, it's important to not blame itself, and also to not receive the projection of people that said, oh, last time we did this together, you were so creative, you had so many solutions, and now suddenly you seem to not be good for anything. You know, there can be that guilt that the 5th line feels when it doesn't show up to other people's expectations. So be able to let go of that, and actually using vulnerability to share a little bit of where you're at, and allow yourself as well the 1st line process of a winter when that's there for you. And the 6th line is always, it's already overlooking to the next hexagram. And here we have the hexagram 43, which in itself is this epiphany or insight. And through that spark, if we say that the first hexagram is maybe not so sophisticated, it's just that spark that created the Big Bang, then created a universe, but it wasn't refined. It was just a spark. When it comes to the 43, it is an insight and epiphany that is often more specific. And I think that the 1st line, the 1st gene key in the 6th line, is already feeling into that epiphany, that understanding, that inner knowing. And here we still in the 43, we are in individual circuitry. So it's still going to be something that comes from deep inside of you. It's not something that is in any way provoked by the outside. So here it is the courage to be the rebel, to have the epiphany, the understanding of something that maybe nobody else has understood before. I also think that this is where we find the wisdom of somebody that has been through the process, and has been through the process in the self, and also the kind of consequences in relationship that the shadow frequency has of the 1st hexagram. The 6th line has lived through it all. It has been projected on. It has had to be alone when it wanted to be in community. It has escaped from the depression. It has blamed the other for not feeling fulfilled, for not feeling creative. And it has also been in deep solitude, an investigation of those states of being that is hard to put our fingers on and completely understand. Yeah, so that was the journey through the lines.